Pam Bondi was invited to debate Robert De Niro on live TV, but it turned out to be a setup. He mocked her, called her a puppet, and thought he'd humiliate her in front of millions. But minutes later, his smug grin vanished. Pam pulled out one thing he never expected, and it changed everything. By the end, De Niro walked off in silence, while she walked away with the nation's respect. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe so you don't miss what they tried to hide. This isn't just another celebrity. Meltdown, the Fox News anchor teased as the cameras rolled, her voice sharp with anticipation. Tonight, a Hollywood legend faces off with a former attorney general. Grab your popcorn. That's how it started. No one watching that night could have predicted what was about to unfold. Not the millions tuned in across the country, not the studio audience buzzing with energy, and certainly not Robert De Niro. He sat there in a sleek navy blazer, leaning back in his chair, arms folded, ready to throw punches, the verbal kind. Across from him, sitting tall and poised in a magenta suit, was Pam Bondi, a legal powerhouse with a resume to match. She wasn't here to smile politely. She was here with a purpose. And though the room tilted left, she didn't seem fazed. In fact, she looked like she'd been waiting for this moment a very long time. The host, seated between them, gave a nervous glance to the producers off-screen. The air crackled with tension. Something big was coming. You could feel it, but no one knew the exact moment it would catch fire. "Robert," the host began, trying to keep things light, "you've been outspoken about your criticism of President Trump. Care to explain your latest comment calling him a, quote, national disaster?" De Niro barely waited a beat. "I'll say it again," he said, his voice calm but dripping with condescension. "Trump is a national disaster, period. And people like her—" He jerked his thumb at Bondi without even looking her way. "Enable him, that's the problem. She's not here to defend the country. She's here to protect a reality TV star who thinks he's a king." The audience erupted. Some whistled. Others clapped furiously. De Niro smirked, basking in the applause like an actor delivering his final monologue. Pam Bondi didn't blink. She turned her head toward him, her expression unreadable. The host half expected a flustered defense or at least a pause. Instead, Bondi tilted her head slightly and smiled, not a smile of amusement, but one of certainty. "Robert," she said, her voice calm and clear, "I find it interesting that you're so quick to judge when just a few years ago you were singing President Obama's praises, despite his administration deporting more people than Trump's ever did." The room quieted. De Niro furrowed his brow. Bondi added smoothly, "Back then, you called Obama a symbol of hope. Now you mock every effort Trump's made to strengthen our borders, improve the economy, and keep Americans safe. Why the flip? Or is this just Hollywood politics?" The audience didn't know how to respond. A few murmurs rose. De Niro looked momentarily thrown, but he recovered quickly, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, please," he scoffed. "You're just parroting Fox News talking points. That's all you ever do. No real thought, just another puppet in the machine." Bondi leaned forward, her tone measured. "A puppet," she repeated, her voice dropping just a notch. "Let me explain something to you, Robert. I spent years in a courtroom fighting real criminals, murderers, cartels, corrupt officials. I don't answer to Hollywood. I answer to the Constitution. That last line, 'I answer to the Constitution,' landed like a thunderclap." A pocket of the audience clapped instinctively, then caught themselves. The energy shifted. The smirk on De Niro's face began to fade, just slightly, but the real moment hadn't arrived yet. Not even close. As intense as that first exchange was, it was just the beginning, the real fireworks, the viral moment that would shatter Twitter feeds and make headlines, hadn't happened yet. But it was coming, because Pam Bondi wasn't. In the just to defend a president, she was there to expose something she'd been holding back, something De Niro never thought would come up. When it did, the entire studio went silent. So silent even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. But that was later. For now, the first shot had been fired, and it was clear. Pam Bondi wasn't backing down. The cameras kept rolling. The crowd, which had been firmly in Darrow's corner, was now watching with curiosity and caution. Pam Bondi wasn't what they expected. She didn't yell, she didn't flinch, she didn't take the bait. She answered with facts, calm authority, and a clarity that even the host couldn't ignore. Darrow tried to claw back control. "Pam, let's not pretend Trump's administration was some constitutional utopia," he said, louder now, hands slicing the air. "Caging kids at the border, rolling back environmental protections, dividing this country like no one else ever has. That's your hero?" Bondi didn't miss a beat. "You talk about cages, Robert," she said, her voice firm. "But those detention facilities, they were built under the Obama administration. The photos everyone saw in 2018, taken in 2014, look it up. That struck a nerve." The audience murmured again, some surprised, others skeptical. The host glanced down at his notes but didn't intervene. The two were locked in. "And let's talk about division," Bondi continued. "You blame Trump for dividing America, but what are you doing right now? You're on national TV, insulting half the country, mocking anyone who doesn't think like you. Does that unite people, or just make you feel good in your bubble?" Darrow let out a bitter chuckle, but it didn't have the power it had 10 minutes ago. "You're twisting this," he said, his voice a touch unsteady. "I'm defending reality," Bondi replied. "Not a fantasy written by late-night comedy writers or political Instagram accounts." Darrow sat back, stunned into a rare moment of silence. Pam Bondi wasn't done yet. Visibly annoyed, Robert Darrow muttered, "You've got your rehearsed lines. That's cute." Pam Bondi smiled again, but this time it was sharper. "No, Robert," she said, leaning in slightly. "What I've got is a law degree, 20 years in prosecution, and a deep respect for this country's founding principles. I don't play characters. I face facts. You play tough guys in movies. I deal with real ones in court." A ripple ran through the audience. Someone in the back let out an involuntary, "Whoa!" For the first time, Darrow didn't reply immediately. He glanced off stage, took a sip of water, adjusted his seat, and just like that, the illusion of dominance began to crack. Pam Bondi wasn't attacking him as a celebrity. She was dismantling his arguments while still respecting his fame. She didn't ridicule, she revealed, and it was starting to work. The host tried to cool the heat. "Let's refocus for a moment," he said quickly. "Pam, Robert, what do you each think is the single greatest threat to America right now?" Bondi didn't miss a beat. "Double standards," she said. "We live in a world where people are silenced for having the wrong opinion, punished for asking questions, and celebrated for saying outrageous things, as long as they say them from the right side. That's not freedom. That's fear in disguise," Darrow scoffed. "You mean people being held accountable?" "No," Bondi said, locking eyes with him. "I mean people like you who claim to champion freedom, but only if it aligns with your politics. That's not accountability. That's control." The tension was building fast. Backstage, producers debated whether to cut to commercial early. One executive whispered, "This is gold," while another added nervously, "But we don't want it to get ugly." Too late. Pam Bondi was just warming up, and Robert Darrow, despite all his bravado, was beginning to realize he wasn't the only heavyweight in the room. For the first time that night, Darrow shifted in his chair. The confidence in his eyes was thinning. He'd walked into the studio expecting an easy slam dunk, another viral moment, torching Trump and earning a round of applause. But Pam Bondi wasn't playing that game, and she wasn't done. "Robert," she said, her tone almost casual, "can I ask you a simple question?" He gave her a skeptical glance. "Go ahead." You've been very vocal about calling Trump a threat to democracy, right? Because he is, Darrow replied instantly. Right, Bondi nodded. But I'm curious. Did you feel the same way about Obama when he authorized drone strikes? Without congressional approval? Or when he signed off on surveillance programs that were later found to infringe on Americans' privacy? Darrow blinked. I didn't see you on TV back then, Bondi continued. I didn't hear a word. In fact, I believe you once called him the most elegant president of your lifetime. The crowd stirred again. Bondi leaned in slightly. So is your concern really about democracy, Robert? Or is it about whose name sits in the Oval Office? Darrow exhaled sharply, visibly annoyed. You're trying to twist my words and spin old history, he snapped. Obama wasn't perfect, but he had class. He didn't run the country like a game show. No, Bondi said calmly. He ran it like a theater, and you applauded. From the front row, the host widened his eyes. The jab hit harder than anyone expected. Listen, Bondi continued. It's not about defending everything Trump's ever said or done. It's about recognizing that policy, not personality, is what changes lives. I may not agree with Trump's tweets, but I agree with reducing taxes for working families, protecting law enforcement, and securing the border. Darrow shook his head. You're defending cruelty. You're defending division. No, she said firmly. I'm defending facts. I'm defending a record that included the lowest black unemployment rate in U.S. history before COVID hit, a record that supported criminal justice reform, something your Hollywood friends cheered until they found out who signed it. The audience was dead still. Even the liberal-leaning pockets didn't know how to respond. This wasn't the version of Pam Bondi they'd seen in clips or read about online. This Pam Bondi was unshakable, articulate, and dangerous, at least to those who'd come expecting a meltdown, and Darrow was starting to feel it. Look, he said, trying to pivot. You're a lawyer. You're smart. Fine. But at the end of the day, Trump stands for hate. That's what people remember. That's why I speak out. Bondi didn't respond right away. She tilted her head slightly, a deliberate pause. Then, with quiet precision, funny you say that, because I remember when you once told an interviewer back in 2009 that Americans needed to stay civil, even in disagreement. You said you'd never let politics get in the way of decency. She paused, letting it hang there. What changed, Robert? For the first time, he looked caught off guard. He searched for a comeback, a line, a defense. Anything, nothing, came. The silence that followed was heavy, uncomfortable. The host cleared his throat. Let's take a quick break. No, Bondi cut in gently, her eyes still locked on Darrow. Let's keep going. The audience, moments ago so eager to clap, sat frozen. They didn't know how to react. Darrow's usual firebrand presence had hit a wall, and it wasn't made of partisanship. It was made of preparation, patience, and Pam Bondi. Darrow forced a smirk. You've done your research, he muttered. I always do, she replied smoothly, especially when I'm sitting across from someone who speaks louder than they listen. Again, okay, the host said, trying to steady the room. Let's refocus a little. We've got two strong voices here. Surely there's common ground. Absolutely, Bondi said quickly. I think Robert and I both want what's best for the country, but where we differ is that I believe truth matters more than applause. That line landed hard. Darrow adjusted his blazer, visibly irritated. You keep talking about truth, he said. Let's talk about your truth. How many people do you represent who lost their health care when Trump tried to gut the ACA? What about the families broken apart by immigration raids? Pam's expression didn't change. I've represented families who lost children to fentanyl, Robert, she said. Children who were poisoned by drugs, smuggled through a border Washington refused to secure. I've stood with parents who buried their sons because of cartel violence that politicians wouldn't even name. She turned slightly toward the audience. I don't live in a script. I don't rehearse outrage in front of a camera. I work with people who have to live with the consequences of bad policy. The audience leaned in. They were really listening now. You act as if every conservative is heartless, she continued. But let me ask you, when was the last time you sat with a widow of a police officer killed in the line of duty, or with a single mum who finally got off food stamps because of the tax cuts you mock? Darrow's lips tightened. You're making this personal. It is personal, she said sharply. That's the problem. You and your friends in Hollywood treat politics like a stage, something to entertain. But for millions of Americans, it's survival. Darrow glanced toward the host, looking for a lifeline. This is ridiculous, he muttered under his breath, but the mic caught it. No, Bondi said, leaning in. What's ridiculous is pretending that yelling louder makes your ideas more valid. You've spent years throwing insults, calling people names, pretending your fame gives you moral authority, but not once have you ever had to back it up. Until tonight, the room went quiet. Even the host seemed unsure of how to steer the conversation now. It wasn't just a clash, it was a reversal. The underdog had taken the wheel, and then Bondi did something unexpected. She paused, took a breath, then said, "Robert, you know what I find fascinating?" He raised an eyebrow cautiously. "What's that?" She smiled faintly. "That for all your political rage, you once had a moment of clarity, a rare moment, and it's the one thing you probably wish I wouldn't bring up tonight." The air in the studio thickened. The host straightened up. Darrow leaned back, squinting. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Pam didn't answer, not yet. Instead, she looked at the camera. "America deserves to hear it," she said softly. "Just not yet." And just like that, she planted a seed. The studio was on edge. Social media was already lighting up. People watching at home were leaning closer to their screens, because now it wasn't just a debate. Pam Bondi had something, and no one, especially not Robert Darrow, knew what it was. The lights in the studio seemed to glow a little brighter, not from intensity, but from tension. Every pair of eyes in the building turned toward Pam Bondi, even those behind the cameras in the control room. She'd just said it. She knew something Darrow wished she wouldn't bring up, and she left it hanging in the air like a match above dry grass. Darrow's voice was low. "What the hell are you talking about?" Pam didn't flinch. "Don't worry," she said softly. "We'll get to it." The host, visibly rattled, tried to interject. "Let's not make this personal." "This isn't personal," Bondi interrupted. "This is about accountability, the kind that doesn't come with cue cards or applause signs." Darrow's posture stiffened, his hands clasped tight in his lap. "You don't get to sit there and pretend like you know my life," he said slowly. Pam smiled faintly. "No, Robert, I don't know your whole life. But I do know that for a man who lectures the country on moral leadership, you've spent an awful lot of time trying to hide the parts that don't fit your narrative," he scoffed. "You're grasping, that's pathetic." "Is it?" Bondi asked, tilting her head. "Or is it striking a nerve?" The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Pam shifted slightly in her seat, her tone steady. "You've built a brand on righteous outrage. But here's the thing about outrage, Robert. It doesn't absolve hypocrisy. You can yell and stomp your feet all you want, but if your record doesn't match your rage, it eventually shows." Darrow leaned forward, voice tight. "You don't scare me, Pam." "That's good," she said, "because what I'm about to say isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to remind everyone watching that truth still matters, even when it's inconvenient." The host's pen tapped rapidly against his notepad. Bondi turned to him. "Can we pull up the clip from 2012, she asked. Darrow's head jerked toward her. "What clip?" Pam looked at the screen calmly. "You know the one." The producer's voice crackled in the host's earpiece. "We have it." The host hesitated. "Are we sure?" Pam nodded once. "Play it." The screen behind them lit up. A grainy clip from a long-forgotten interview flickered to life. Darrow on a red carpet, shaking hands with journalists, giving a glowing review of a certain political figure. "Say what you will," the younger Darrow said in the clip, "but Trump's doing something that's shaking things up, and I think that's healthy. People are too comfortable in D.C." The audience gasped. "Leave on national TV." Darrow sat frozen, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on Bondi. She turned back to him slowly. "You praised him once, Robert," she said, "before the media turned, before your friends turned. You didn't always hate him. In fact, you respected that he challenged the system." Darrow's mouth opened, but no words came out. Bondi's voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. "So which one's the act, Robert? That version of you, or this one?" The host stared ahead, stunned into silence. The audience didn't move. Even the camera operator stopped adjusting the frame. It was a moment, and Pam Bondi owned it, but she wasn't done. What no one in the studio knew, not even the producers, was that Bondi had one more card to play. It wasn't a clip. It was something far more personal. And when she said it, the internet would break. The studio lights didn't flicker, but it felt like they should have. Robert Darrow blinked at the screen like he'd seen a ghost. The timestamp in the corner was clear, his voice unmistakable. At one point, he had praised Donald Trump, not as a friend or a fan, but as someone shaking up a stagnant political world. And now he'd built a brand tearing that man down. Bondi didn't gloat. She didn't lean back or smile like someone who'd scored a win. She leaned in, not physically, but in tone, in presence. "People change," she said softly. "That's fair. But when they pretend they've never stood where they once stood, that's not change, that's erasure." Darrow's jaw flexed. "You think I care about what I said 13 years ago? A throwaway comment on a red carpet?" Pam nodded. "You should care. Because millions of Americans watching your speeches, your rants, your sound bites, they believe you've always felt this way. But the truth is, you were once more open-minded than the image you perform now." "I'm not performing," Darrow shot back, his voice rising. "That's where we disagree," Bondi said, calm as ever. "Because I actually remember meeting you." Darrow's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" The host leaned forward, curiosity crackling in the air. Even the audience shifted in their seats. Pam's voice was steady. "It was 2010. You visited Florida for a veterans fundraiser, a closed-door event. You probably don't remember, it was a short speech, nothing political. But afterward you stayed for dinner. You sat 2 spots away from me." Darrow blinked, silent. "You were polite, charming, thoughtful," she continued. "You asked about my work as Attorney General, and you said something that night I'll never forget." The host was leaning in now. "What did he say?" Pam looked straight at Darrow, her voice soft but unwavering. "You said, people like you should be running the country, not people pretending to care." A ripple of gasps ran through the room. Darrow shook his head, a shaky laugh. "You're making that up." "I'm not," she said, "and I don't need to. There were others there who heard it too." The host glanced at the control room, the producers scrambling for guest lists, video, anything. Meanwhile, Darrow was unraveling, slowly, visibly. "You've changed, Robert," Bondi said, "and maybe that's your right. But don't pretend. The rest of us didn't notice. You went from being a thoughtful observer to a megaphone for outrage. You're twisting the truth," Darrow muttered. "No," Bondi replied. "I'm just reminding everyone that truth doesn't come with a fan base. It stands on its own, even when it's inconvenient." The host cleared his throat. "We're going to take a break in a moment." "No," Bondi said, her tone gentle. "We haven't reached the moment yet." The host blinked. "What moment?" She turned back to the camera. "The reason this interview will be remembered. The studio had transformed. What began as another partisan clash had become a reckoning, truth versus performance, and performance was losing." Darrow sat back in his chair, arms crossed, his Usual weapons, dominance, charm, failing him. The crowd wasn't cheering like it used to. His comebacks weren't landing. And worst of all, Pam Bondi was still calm. Too calm. The host shifted in his seat. "Pam, you said this moment would be remembered. What did you mean?" Pam didn't blink. "I mean that before tonight, people only saw one version of Robert Darrow. The loud, angry, politically righteous one. But after tonight, they'll see the other version, the private one, the one most people never knew existed." Darrow's head snapped up. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying," she said. "I'm remembering something you may have forgotten, but I haven't." Darrow rolled his eyes. "Please." Pam reached down, opened her bag, and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. No theatrics, no drama, just quiet deliberation. "I don't carry this around for moments like this," she said, holding it carefully. "It was filed away, like most, and things from a past life. But when I heard you'd be on tonight, and how you'd been talking lately, I dug it out." Darrow stared at the paper like it was a live wire. Bondi began to read. "Pam, thank you for the conversation. I appreciate it. Your perspective, strong but respectful. We may not agree on everything, but I admire your clarity and conviction. We need more leaders like you, even if they don't always vote like me." She paused. "It's signed, Robert Darrow, April 2010. Silence. You could hear a pin drop. The host's eyes widened. "Is that real?" Pam nodded. "Handwritten. I kept it because it meant something to me. Not because you were a celebrity, but because you were someone who could disagree without being vile." Darrow's face was stone. "That letter, it was private." Pam folded it neatly. "Yes, and I honored that for 15 years. Until tonight, when you came on national television to brand me a puppet and call the president I once served a disaster. When you decided, the moment wasn't over. It had just begun. Character assassination was more valuable than honest discourse." Darrow's voice cracked just slightly. "You had no right to bring that up." "I didn't plan to," Bondi replied, her tone calm. "But when you decided to pretend like you've always hated everyone on my side of the aisle, when you rewrote your own past to fit your current brand, that's when I realized Americans deserve to see the full picture." The audience fell. Silent, stunned. Off camera, the host whispered to a producer, "This is going to break the internet." Pam looked over at Darrow one last time. "I respected you, Robert. I really did. But tonight, I didn't recognize you." Darrow didn't respond. He couldn't, because there were no words that could fix what had just been exposed. When the letter was read, everything in that studio shifted. The air wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, still, like everyone had just seen something they were never supposed to see. No cue to clap, no applause needed. The silence itself was deafening, louder than any standing ovation. Even the host had frozen, fingers pressed to his earpiece, eyes flicking nervously between Bondi and Darrow, unsure whether to cut away or let it play out. Darrow sat motionless, but behind his eyes, something was racing. He'd been outplayed. Not with insults or theatrics, but with his own words, his own signature on his own letter. And America was watching. Bondi folded the note one last time and slipped it back into her bag. No gloating, not even a smile. She just waited, giving Darrow the chance to speak, to recover, to respond. But he didn't. Not at first. His breathing changed, deeper, a little faster. His hands clenched into fists on his knees. Then he snapped. "Oh, come on," Darrow shouted, voice rising louder than anything he'd said all night. "You drag out some old letter from over a decade ago and think that makes you a hero. That makes Trump a saint. You think it erases everything?" Bondi stayed silent, watching him unravel. "You want to play the long game?" Darrow barked, pointing out toward the audience. "Then let's talk about what your side has done. What You've ignored. You hide behind your fancy title and your law books, but you're just as deep in it as the rest of them." The host tried to step in. "Robert, let's bring it down a notch." "No, I'm not going to bring it down," Darrow shot back, voice cracking with anger. "I've had it with these setups. This whole thing was a trap. You wanted this to go viral. You planned this." Pam finally spoke. Her voice was measured, almost gentle. "No, Robert," she said. "I didn't plan your hypocrisy. That was yours. I just reminded you of it." A sharp inhale rippled through the audience. They could feel it. He was losing control. "You conservatives love your moments," Darrow growled, eyes locked on Bondi. "Your little viral clips, your victory laps. Well, enjoy this one then." Without waiting for a cue or a break, Darrow stood up from his chair. The host's voice cracked. Robert, we're still live." "I'm done," Darrow said coldly. He pulled off his mic, dropped it on the floor, and stormed off. The set, leaving behind a stunned host, a silent crowd, and one very composed woman in magenta. Pam Bondi didn't even flinch. She just looked at the host and said, "Guess we found the real performance after all." Within seconds, the clip was online, and it was already going viral. The walk-off was still echoing in the studio as the internet took over. In minutes, clips of that final exchange were chopped, captioned, and posted on every major platform. The hashtag #JarBondiV trended worldwide in under 10 minutes, but it was one line, just one, that spread like wildfire. "I didn't plan your hypocrisy. That was yours." It was everywhere, on screens, in coffee shops, in group chats, splashed across Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. Even mainstream outlets that usually ignored conservative voices couldn't resist. They ran headlines that night that made even the most seasoned political watchers pause. Pam Bondi stuns Darrow on live TV. Forces exit after on-air revelation. The letter heard. Round the internet, Darrow walks off. Bondi walks away victorious. The clip wasn't just trending, it was being dissected frame by frame. Commentators on both sides weighed in. Some liberals tried to dismiss it, cheap trick, a setup. But others admitted what was plain to see. She didn't scream, she didn't insult. She just out-argued him. That's rare on TV. Conservatives celebrated it like a Super Bowl win. In every corner of social media, the reactions piled in. She stayed calm while he lost it. That's leadership. He didn't just walk off, he ran. Finally, someone with facts, not feelings. I'm no Bondi fan, but she handled that. Like a pro. Backstage at the Fox News studio, producers scrambled to handle the media explosion. The control room, usually quiet after a show, was buzzing. Clip it, upload it to YouTube now. Get the full segment on Twitter. Use the moment she reads the letter. We're going to re-air this at the top of every hour. The host, still seated, and a bit dazed, wrapped up the broadcast as best he could. Well, if you're just tuning in, you've missed one of the most remarkable exchanges we've seen on this program, ever. And then there was Bondi. As the credits rolled, she calmly removed her mic, stood up, and nodded politely to the staff still in the room. No celebration, no gloating. She wasn't there for the headline, but she'd just made one anyway. Her phone buzzed, once, twice, then non-stop. Texts, missed calls, voicemails, from political allies, commentators, even moderate Democrats. It was masterful,